Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to No Food Live, wherever you are. I'm your host, Courtney Riggle, joined by my co-host, Matthew Lang. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the No Food series. How about that? We're already on our second season. And for those who are new to our series, No Food is here to dive deep into the world of food informatics and the Internet of Food. We interview scientists, thought leaders, and innovators to foster collaboration and advance global food system digitization and democratization efforts. No Food Live airs the third Thursday every month, but you don't have to remember that. You'll never miss an episode if you click down below and subscribe to our No Food channel.
Hi, everyone. We're so pleased to have you join us for No Food Live today, or whatever day you may end up watching this. Since our previous episodes are all available for streaming in case you missed the live broadcast. I can't believe we're on our second season. It's just amazing to me that we're already there. We had a great first season, and we thank you all so much for tuning in, and your feedback continues to make our episodes better. If you have ideas for new episodes or guests, we want to hear from you. You can mail us at nofood@ic-foods.org, or you can just click the link in the video description, which I just realized we need to update. So that will be up there before the end of this episode. Looking back at season 1, it's hard to find. I was trying to find my favorite episode or my favorite part, but it seemed like every episode got better. No offense to our first guests. I think we got a little more practice as we went along. But actually, one of my favorite shows, one of my favorite parts, was when Valeria Pesce from the UNFAO sort of laid out the landscape of standards internationally for all the varied vocabularies and metadata about food across ag, food processing, diet, and health.
Oh,
It's
right.
wonderful.
That was the interoperability, big data, and semantic web of food episode.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah, and let's see. Meta Davari talked about the CJR big data and ag platform, and that was really a great example of some of these standards being put into use.
Right. And I think we followed that up with Rob Trice from the Mixing Bowl. He gave us a really nice business use case for interoperability across ag, and
And
then we
I
moved into
also
food
really,
composition. Yeah,
I liked our two-part food composition, episodes 4 and 5, where the
hmm
first part featured some cutting-edge laboratory and applied work being done at UC Davis by Daniela Barile, Amir Taha, and Selena Wong, and on foods such as milk, olive oil, and how the molecular components can impact human health.
right. And then moving in that next one, like you said, with Naomi. Leading into the next one with Naomi Fukugawa and David Wishart, who lead some of the largest food composition databases in the world. And then having Bruce German talking about a new effort all about the periodic table of foods and their project to quantify systematically foods from around the world. Anyway, I wish we had time to highlight all of season 1, but keep an eye out for our season 1 disco remix, where we bring in the highlights in case you don't have time to watch all these
I
other
can't see.
episodes. We'll be bringing that out soon.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, let's get started with our new guests.
all right. So today, our topic today, as I hope you all know, is no philo-food. So we'll take a broader look and explore how to approach reconciling diverse disciplinary and cultural philosophies to enable ethical, transparent, and computable languages in food.
Right. We'll be starting our conversation with Dr. Andrea Borghini, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of Milan in Italy, and Director of the Culinary Mind Center for the Philosophy of Food.
Second up today will be Beatrice Serini, a PhD student who works with Professor Borghini at the University of Milan and is coordinator for Culinary Mind Center for the Philosophy of Food.
Right. And finally, we have with us Revathi Kolagala, I hope I said your name right. She's the executive director of the Regen Foundation, and we'll be hearing a lot about how we can take language and actually use language and philosophy and culture to inform the development of these cyber infrastructures.
So let's get started. As mentioned, first up we have Dr. Andrea Borghini, Associate Professor of Philosophy at University of Milan in Italy, and founder and director of the Culinary Mind Center for the Philosophy of Food. Professor Borghini is a philosopher with expertise in theoretical tools for thinking about how we speak, structure, sense, and feel about food, eating, and culinary culture. Professor Borghini joins us today to tell us about the mission of Culinary Mind and the importance of philosophy and when it comes to building coherent languages for computational systems. And quickly, before we start, let me remind our live stream audience that you can type your questions in the comments box, and we'll be responding to those live throughout the show. So, Dr. Borghini, Andrea, such a pleasure to have you here today. What can you tell us about Culinary Mind, and maybe walk us through some details about how philosophy can help us build better cyber infrastructures for food?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks for having me, and hi everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. In this brief moments that we have, I'll just try to highlight what we're trying to do at Culinary Mind, the Center for the Philosophy of Food that is based at the University of Milan. So when you think about probably food and philosophy, some of the first topics that may come to mind might relate to vegetarianism, for instance. So animal ethics in general: should we eat animals? How, when, under which conditions? Or environmental ethics, or classic questions about taste, where the objectivity of taste or subjectivity of taste. I started teaching and researching questions about food and philosophy about 15 years ago. And when I began, I noticed that certainly very few philosophers and other scholars had delved into what I'll call more conceptual questions about food and theoretical in general. So this is what we tried to do with Culinary Mind, which I co-founded in 2017 with Patrick Kengish, who's a philosopher now based in Freiburg and soon in Geneva. And the goal was precisely to cover what we could see was a gap in literature concerning food issues, regarding precisely more theoretical questions that philosophers could have and probably should have addressed. So very briefly, if you also will take a look on Culinary Mind website, you will see that many of the topics that we cover may range from food waste, and here are some other examples, like a range of we try to showcase new work by young and less young, more accomplished philosophers that previously often didn't even know of each other's work, were not aware of the fact that other philosophers from different philosophy branches were working on food issues, and we try to find connections. And then we also try to find connections with not, of course, just philosophers, but recognizing that the challenges that we have are really cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, all sorts of disciplinary connections that you may want to establish. We try to bring in also scholars and practitioners, that deal address food issues. So what are some of the main challenges that we deal with? One way to sum them up is really to think that there is a very important, daunting integration challenge in front of us that can start from the very basic question, of course, of what is food. In general, how do we answer that question? What is it if we have to build a food ontology? What are the things? What are the entities that we're going to categorize? And of course, under which even fundamental categories, say processes or entities, are we going to categorize them? So the very the most daunting challenge is here concern the integration, specific in the specifics of different ontologies, like scientific and folk ontologies, different levels of categorization. These ontologies may correspond to different levels of categorization, so the micro and the macro, entities, and also how do we fit, any type of description we may try to provide of different ontological levels, say the microbial level, or when you're trying to describe what you buy in a supermarket, with axiological questions in general, so questions that pertain to value, that could be ethical, could be more broadly cultural or political. And also, in all of this, at some point you have to take into account what are the different stakeholders' perspectives, because as also in philosophy is well known, depending on the perspective through which you are looking at a certain domain of discourse, through which you are producing a certain ontology, you may end up having, privileging different fundamental categories. So what we try to do is really to tease out these questions and to discuss them precisely with other philosophers and then other scholars that recognize their importance. Here we have a methodological challenge, especially also for philosophers. And I think in the past at least 2 decades, philosophers have been rethinking their methods quite a bit and also tried to introduce what one could call more mixed methods, meaning to use not simply, say, logical analysis, but also to incorporate data analysis and to have some conceptual analysis that is some conceptual work that is also more specific to a domain of discourse. Okay, so what we try to, one way in which you can think of this, or you can summarize this, is that what we try to do is a form of conceptual rethinking. So it's not a conceptual analysis which has the pretense to be, say, fully systematic and valid in any possible context, but it's precisely conceptual rethinking that might be based on the different ontological level that you're assuming, the stakeholders that you're bringing in, and the type of also goal that you have in mind. So clearly, this is this type of conceptual analysis requires to take into account what comes from other disciplines. The work that is done, of course, in other disciplines, from natural sciences to social sciences and other humanities too, and to think to be able to think at different levels of representation and how to do conceptual rethinking at different level of representation. So it could be precisely at the level of programming, or it could be at the level of public policy. And we have to be able, as philosophers, to advise and to try to integrate precisely these different types of representations. And the tools we may usually put into effect for doing these are they range from formal ontology, which I imagine several of the viewers here may be familiar with, to participatory tools that are typical of political science intervention, especially in public policies about decision making. So just to give a brief example, then we'll get more, I think, later on, probably also from Beatrice. I imagine the ways in which we think about this is that you may stumble upon a food concept that is complicated, in the sense it gives some troubles. It could be disputed among different users. It might not seem to play the function that you want to play. It might not communicate the right type of information between producers and consumers, say. And so what we try to do is to rethink of the different, what we call them, dimensions of a food concept, and how we could precisely rethink them so that the concept is better tuned to its goal. So what we look at are the ontological categories that the food concept tries to map out. We look at what kind of data and the methodologies for collecting those data have been used with respect to precisely mapping out this ontological domain of discourse. And then we also think of what are the stakeholders that have the most important authority to decide what you could claim to be like the ontological status of your category. So just to give a very basic example, if you're dealing with champagne, the Fiat Act, so the stakeholders that can turn some wine into champagne is really the consortium of champagne producers that each year determines which wines pass the bar and can actually be called champagne and deserve their name. And of course, with them, you have other stakeholders like the EU as an institution and other institutions that, for example, on the WTO, they might recognize the geographical indication and more generally the TRIPS agreement, that are the intellectual property rights agreement under which foods like champagne, products like champagne are protected. So a champagne is a certain kind of entity, right, within a certain ontological category whose existence is determined by certain actors and based on certain data. There will be, sampling of champagne bottles, for instance. And we could think of what are the aims and values for having, products like champagne, or and this is just to give an example, right? And so if you think that champagne is the way in which it is used is a troublesome concept, it really rubs against some of our desiderata about how the concept should work, should function. What we try to do is to devise new strategies for rethinking it. We apply this, as I said, pretty much across the board. So just to give some example of the research we have done, and it has applied to concepts like food biodiversity, which hadn't really been studied by philosophers before. The concept of wild food, the idea of obesity, how obesity is defined, or the very basic conception of recipe. Believe it or not, there are thousands and thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of books on recipes, or recipe books, even just in English. But there was until a few years ago not really a debate and not really a theory about what is a recipe. So these are just some of the topics that we work on, and other ones might include hunger, or the trying to define the so-called spaces where we dine with others, in public, that sometimes are called third spaces. So I think this is it. In just these very few minutes, I hope I could give you an idea of what we try to do at Culinary Mind. And of course, please get in touch if you have any questions, suggestion.
Wow, thanks, Andrea. That was beautiful. So many ideas going off in my mind watching your presentation. I'm curious, one of the things that really caught my attention was when you talked about privileging different types of information. I'm just curious, what is that the kind of thing that leads maybe to AI bias? Is that the kind of thing that leads I guess this has to do with getting the right stakeholders in the room. Can you just comment briefly on that idea of sort of privileging different kinds of information relative to what you're doing?
Yeah. Look, it's there are different ways of I think making clearer that idea. One very basic one, just think of food labels. What should go on a label of a food, and those are of course very complicated decisions, and these are about what matters, for example, with respect to I guess certain communication processes that will be relevant to consumers. Mm-hmm. And the piece of information might go precisely over what are the list of ingredients, but even it could be a piece of information whether something is milk or not. And as you know, there is heated dispute about what should be called milk or not. So is that a piece of information? I would say yes, and it's pretty much disputed. What are the and one really important thing that I think we are very well aware of is that the information might not just be linguistic. Right. One of the things that, for example, I teach even now is semiotics of food, and think of the fact that even in EU, the packaging of products, of plant-based milk, cannot really be parallel to the packaging, of course, of dairy milk precisely because in a way it conveys some sort of information. So
Right.
we could even think of the box as an ontological category, and that's
right. Wow. Fascinating. Okay, well, let's come back to that in the conversation between all of us. And right now, let's shift to our next guest, Beatrice Sarini. Beatrice is a PhD student at the University of Milan in Italy and a coordinator at the Culinary Mind Center for the Philosophy of Food. Beatrice, one of the reasons we invited you on this show is because I saw you give a fantastic talk at the recent Integrated Food Ontology workshop, which was part of the International Conference for Biomedical Ontologies. And for those in our audience who have not attended that event, I would say, if you're interested in ontology and data integration across disciplines, and you're in the biological sciences, any biological science, that's a must attend event. So I realize we don't have time to recapitulate your entire talk, Beatrice, but perhaps you could briefly walk us through the essential elements as you see them for the work that you're doing at the Culinary Mind Center with Professor Borghini, and maybe just highlight some of the aspects of your work.
Thank you, Matthew, for the introduction and for this opportunity. I will go through a specific example today that I presented also at Bolzano, as you said. After Andrea presented our mission, I will show you a specific conceptual work we have done on the concept of local food. As we all know, there are many gaps in our conceptual representation of the food system. But even when we have to do with mainstream and apparently common, simple concepts like local food, eating local food diet, when we dig deeper into their meaning, they can reveal an internal fragility. Local food is considered a model for sustainable diet, a tool for cohesion, a market label, yet defining when a food entity is a local food is not as easy as it may seem. And the more we think about it, we can find multiple interpretations contradicting each other sometimes. Local food ends up failing in the representation, in a proper representation of the food domain, with also undesirable consequences for some or all of the stakeholders involved in its use. However, we with Andrea and Nicola, we worked together, Nicola Piras, we worked together on this conceptual analysis of local food. We truly believe that this concept of local food and the relation between food and place it expresses has a role in economies, cultures, lifestyles, and dietary behaviors. So we really need this concept. And if we want to amend the flows of local food concepts so that producer and consumers, but also regulators, can use it in a meaningful way, we propose this conceptual work to turn local food into a robust concept that is comprehensive, coherent, and inclusive. So today I'm showing you just the first step, let's say, of this conceptual clarification, this conceptual analysis work. And we should start by asking when something can be said to be local. A local can be actually said of a lot of different food items, more complex than the one we can find at the farmers market. So we have recipes, we have menus, we have diets, we have ways of consumption, processes, habits. So all these food entities have different relations to locality. Just some very quick examples I have here. Look at this salad. If we want to consider this a local recipe, should we associate it with as many locations as the number of its ingredients? We can have a problem of proliferation here. And think about salt. That is really, really common in a lot of foods we eat every day. How should we choose which ingredient should contribute to the locality of the item we are looking at, the lettuce or also the salt? And you can think, I imagine that you can think of many recipes considered local independently of whether some of their ingredients are. This is really, really quick, but what I want to say is that from this general question, from the answer to this general question, we derived three main different criteria to define when a concept, when a food can be local. So we have the geographical distance criteria. So localness depends on the distance between the place of consumption and the place of production. We have the geographical origin criteria. So a food is local when it has an original place where it belongs that confer it certain special features. This is the idea of terroir that I think you all know. And the third criteria is the social distance. So the idea that a food is more local, the more its supply chain involves a direct social encounter between the producer and the consumer. So these are really three different instantiation of the local food concept. The next step in this analysis is to look at their internal structure, their internal content. And one way to do so is by following the dimension that Andrea was showing you before, that slide, okay, with the 4 dimension of a food concept. And we can apply it to the first version and see here that what kind of empirical validity ground this concept. The miles are the data here. And what part of reality this concept is representing. That part composed by all the foods that have traveled less than 400 miles. Who is the actor and who performs the decision to define this idea of local food? In this case, we have an institutional agents, the US Department of Agriculture. And what is the goal? Increasing local economies. And we can go for with the same kind of analysis, also with the second version of the concept. So the geographical origin, we use here the example of the Italian cheese called Pitto. And here the properties are not just hard data, but there's also a qualitative aspect of these in this dimension. So the process, the know-how, the tradition, the relationship of that certain group of people with that landscape. The ontological categories, we have this cheese, the physical entity and its relation with the landscape and the qualities they are supposed to share. The fiat tax, we have a consortium here who decide how the cheese has to be done and where when you can call these cheese local from that valley. And the aim here is protecting the gustatory value, the local intellectual property of the people living there and their tradition. And the third version, okay, here we have a strong qualitative aspect here, in the data and methodology section, but also in the fiat text and the ontological categories. So it's the perceived quality of that interaction, the perceived quality of the food, of that way of buying, purchasing, and meeting people, exchanging food knowledge. That is the empirical validity that grounds the validity of the concept. It's that level of empirical data we are looking for, and are involved mainly individual agents. So we don't have states or governments here. We just have individual acting freely and trying to, with the goal of enhancing social value through food. So this was really quick, I know, but for the sake of time, I want just to say that this is the starting point for building a negotiation table. So you can see the 3 conceptual map of the 3 version of the local food concept, and we can negotiate at different level. At the lower level, we can look closer into one dimension and discuss whether this dimension is well built or not. Like, are we looking at the right data here? Are they justified? And so on. At the mid-level, the negotiation of the concept happens within the dimension of one version. So we have, let's say, the geographical distance account of local food, and we look at the relationship between the data we are using and the goal we have in mind when we use the concept. Are they going together, or there's a conflict? And the higher level of negotiation, the most challenging one, but the one when we have also very different stakeholder conflicting with their different version of the concept, is the different instantiation negotiation. So we have to put all this data, all these ontological categories and fiat and aims together and try to see if we can find a criteria for reaching the robust concept I was talking about in the beginning. So wide, inclusive, coherent, and comprehensive. And I'm finishing just presenting here some other topics where we are trying to apply the same philosophical ontology approach. The one is redesigning, the first one, redesigning geographical indications. So the concept of geographical origin and the pattern for food in a scenario where the climate change is actually changing the identity condition of food and agriculture. An analysis of the feature, the ontological feature of the places where we eat food in the public space. And the last one that is precisely the topic of my PhD research, that I'm trying to work on the interaction between the scientific ontologies and the folk ontologies in the light of this huge microbial turn, if we can define it in this way, that is actually happening in the natural and biomedical science. So that's all. I hope it was clear enough. And thank you for this opportunity and for having us today.
Wow, thank you, Beatrice. That was really interesting. And I know I'm not speaking alone when I say that all across the food system, everyone struggles with that local concept. So it's super exciting to see you kind of digging into something like that. And I think, I mean, to toss in another couple of terms out there that seem to be really hard for people to get their hands on: healthy food, sustainable food. Those are all kind of super squishy ones that we hope you'll turn to at some point. And I also really liked how you laid out kind of the negotiation process for the concept. And I'm just wondering how far you've gotten for the local food case in that negotiation, and what kind of partners have been involved, or if you're really just kind of at the conceptual phase and you're still working on the definitions.
Thank you for your question. And just something very quick, in the same paper when we work on local food, there is something also on healthy food, and it's something personally I'm really interested in. So I totally agree with you about this suggestion. Healthy and sustainable are for sure on the list. And yeah, we are more on the conceptual side of the work, let's say. But actually in 2019, we tried during a conference, so still a very conceptual environment, to involve producer, like beer producer, saffron producer in South region in Italy, to discuss together on this concept. And we really find it hard to establish a common language. So maybe it's something, this is something more to take into account, define a common language between different stakeholders, because as you said, if we are not on the same page when we're talking about what is sustainable, what is the priority, what is a changing climate, what is a just food system, these are like just, we have to create a shared vocabulary. But I think we are really open to collaboration that allow us as philosophers to integrate our approach with more pragmatic, let's say, and practical words. So if someone is listening, we are here with our conceptual maps. And that's all. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. And I think we're going to be teasing a lot of these threads throughout the rest of our conversation today. But for now, let's turn to our final guest today. And I actually think this is a great sequence, because she'll be talking, I think, a little bit about how we really do engage with the more distributed stakeholder groups. So welcome, Revathi. And she is the executive director of Region Foundation. For those who are unfamiliar with Region Foundation, it is a foundation linked with the Region Network that envisions and develops tools for using technology to accelerate and shift to regenerative agriculture and more sustainable food systems. Revathi leads the effort at Region Foundation to co-design and implement community-owned governance frameworks in decentralized networks with a focus on digital and social inclusion. So really, how do we reach that broader public? Revathi, or Reeve, thank you so much for being here. You describe yourself as an ethical technologist. Can you tell us more about what that means and how that impacts the work you do with Region? And then linking with the presentation we just heard from Beatrice, how do you see languages and ontological frameworks underpinning the new technologies? How can that contribute to digital inclusion in food systems?
Sure. I'm going to touch upon sort of the question Courtney had before diving into the slide. I find that any system, including technology and food systems, whether we like it or not, there is always an element of ethics to it. And if we recognize it, that's even better, because each one of the system influences the lives of those people who interact with it. But with that in mind, and I'll come back to that through the course of the short time we have here together. But I thought we're talking about food, so we should talk about something concrete here that we eat and enjoy. And so what you have on your screens is in the spirit of local food. This is what we would make locally where I am here. One of the many things. And I'm right now in South Central India, and these are balls made of a grain, and they're locally called ragi. It's the peasant's food. So this is what the wife would make at home, and the farmer would eat in the morning and go to the field for a long day of work, and it keeps him full and satisfied, right? But at the same time, I think just thinking of why the language we have around food is so important, it's also finger millet. And that's probably a word that a lot of you are more familiar with in terms of millets in general. And those are the seeds, or what you would usually associate with when you say finger millet. And why this matters is because the people here who grow ragi, eat ragi, do not necessarily know that this is finger millet, and all the economic implications and nutritional implications that come from them. There is a cultural connotation to each of these words, and language is powerful. It impacts, right? We consider millets to be somewhat more nutritional, and you would pay more for it. It's not peasants' food anymore. People in urban India and in other places would pay a lot to have like a millet cookie or something like that. And that's sort of the background I come from, and why I think about the cultural and ethical aspect of technological systems and other systems. So I'm here kind of talking about two roles, two hats I wear in the world. One is as the executive director of Region Foundation, and that is, as Courtney mentioned, it is a nonprofit which is part of the larger umbrella of Region Network. It is in the crypto space and aligns economy with ecology. And the Region Network overall wants to make sure that land stewards and farmers are rewarded for ecological regeneration, and that includes sustainable food practices, regenerative agriculture practices, everything else that you would associate with that. I'm also a technology mentor to this organization called Seva Cooperative Federation. It is one of the largest women's cooperative federations in the world. It's located here in India. It has over 300,000 members, all of whom tend to be usually rural, low income, and in the informal economy. People in Seva are exactly the kind of ones who would call that ragi. And when I am in the larger ecosystem and region foundation circles, even referring to the same kind of food or plant, I would probably be calling it a finger millet. And the twain often don't meet. But the question is, can they meet and should they meet? And why does that matter? It is different cultures, different languages, different contexts. So just to go into that a little bit more about why that matters in my role at Region Foundation, the foundation is a nonprofit in the larger region network ecosystem. And I'm not sure how much you're all sort of familiar with the crypto and the blockchain world. But what usually happens in blockchain and what's true in region network is we have a token called region token, which is the means by which you have carbon credits and ecological regeneration and all of that being recognized and exchanged, right? So when the system was created, which was a genesis, what you're seeing here is sort of like the broad distribution of tokens. And there, 35% of them is stewarded by the Region Foundation, of which 30% of them is what the foundation gives away explicitly to make sure that underrepresented stakeholders are part of the system. Otherwise, usually what such a blockchain network or a crypto network is every token holder has a vote, has some say in decision making. But this is an explicit attempt that at least 30% and more, which would be 35%, is represented by stakeholders who may not otherwise be able to buy a token and would not otherwise be represented. Now, why does this matter and how does this connect to data systems, right? At the heart of it all, Region Network is a data system. It uses data to verify and validate regeneration. And the system is open source and so on. But as you think about what it means to make decisions in the system, it is stewarding the ecosystem, which is figuring out what does it even mean for regeneration. And part of these questions could be everything that, Beatrice talked about in terms of local food may be better for climate. We might have food that's considered sustainable, and we might have practices in agriculture that are more sustainable. And if so, how do we determine which ones are those, and how are we able to verify them? And who decides that? If you have data and information about a particular land or farm, how do you decide that it is regenerative? Because that has very real implications for the farmer or the land steward on the other side or the region, and they can get compensated, right? So here, this portion of tokens allows these stakeholders to have a say in the design of this decision-making mechanism. So as you can imagine, what we're really trying to do is, if it's underrepresented stakeholders, we want people across the global south and global north, across different cultures, different languages, to be represented here and to be able to make these decisions. But that's harder than it sounds, right? Because words matter. As I've just showed you, growing ragi in a certain way is probably sustainable, but the woman in Karnataka in India would not know it. But somebody in the Bay Area might be really incentivized to invest or in sustainable practices of agriculture, of growing finger millets. But there is no match because the languages are different and the cultural contexts are different. And that's why words really matter. The women in rural India would not even know what payment for ecosystem services mean, and they miss out on a whole lot of opportunity because of that. They really miss out on having the say in deciding what those are, and they often do not want to participate. And that's the point and the perspective I come from, that if you want to have technological systems that really are ethical, you have to consider how they impact the lives of the people who interact with them. And when we think of data systems that are invariably a part of a lot of technological systems these days, that includes the words used, the data used, and inclusion of various types of data is also a representation of a lot of these communities. And when we think through and we have a more intentional system that includes data standards, which equates ragi with finger millets, which allows for a local Indian equivalent for payment of ecosystem services, then that makes those systems more equitable. And so as a part of this, we are really looking at what does it mean to have data systems in region that are interoperable and that are commonly stewarded via all of these stakeholders. There are different philosophies that we are influenced by. I am personally a commons governance researcher, so there is a more advanced set of Ostrom's principles, for those of you who are aware of governance, that we are, and I am personally influenced by. But at the end of the day, it is very much sort of a question of relationships, and I'm really happy to delve more into the conversation and maybe talk more with Beatrice and Andrea in their fields of work on how the community's cultural representation and their identity and all of that really comes into play when we have such a system in practice, and we really need to consider it and the best ways of doing so. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic back to Courtney, and happy to take any questions. And Matthew, sorry.
Yeah, great. Wow. So this is really great. And somehow the episodes still just keep getting better. I'm thrilled because I really feel like we're diving into some of these issues that are really, really important, but also somewhat abstract and things that people don't think about on a regular basis. Especially oftentimes we have data engineers who are just say, how do I match this data to that data system? And they have no concept of this idea of all of the elements that we've talked about today, inclusiveness and enabling essentially a democratization of the systems that we are digitizing. So maybe we could bring everybody back, but I'll give you the first shot at this question, Rave. So what do you think? Given what we've heard today, what are the next steps that we need to do to if we could define a roadmap, say here's how we're going to democratize food systems through digitization, what would you think would be some of the most important first steps to do in order to make that happen?
Thank you for the thoughtful question, and I'm thrilled to be in this group of incredibly diverse and intellectual folks. So how do we make an equitable, democratized, digitized food system, right?
Right.
I think when you talk about food systems, there are at least three things that matter. One, who is designing the system, who is part of the system, and how does the system evolve. And all three of those need to be democratized. Who is designing the system? So invariably, who designs the system sort of influences how the system is designed. And oftentimes what happens is the people who are impacted by the food system are not part of those who design it, but it still matters that we go and get the inputs of those who are impacted. So part of this, I think, is as we think about how we have data and food data represented in food systems, can we also, via people like Beatrice and Andrea, think through how different ontological frameworks are represented and what are the different cultures and communities that we can incorporate in these and make sure that that's considered when we design the food system and try to do justice to that question. And for the other aspects of the system, it also is really important that we consider how the system evolves, because what usually tends to happen is a system starts with a small group of stakeholders, and then it eventually has to grow, and it also responds to external factors, and the system is ever changing. So as food systems evolve, so too should the data systems that are part of it, and that includes data standards. And that is something I'm really curious to get everyone's perspective on, because something that we really see as essential in the region ecosystem and we are thinking about is, amongst other things, making sure that the registries are interoperable and the data systems are interoperable, so there's flexibility that each system sort of evolves but still stays part of the whole. And along with that, that the governance of the whole system, as I mentioned, includes stakeholders from different parts of the world and in the language and culture that they're comfortable with. So that there are intermediaries whose explicit role is to facilitate community conversations about what is going on in the overall system, and that people are engaged and they participate in decision making on how the system should evolve, on how different data standards should change or if they should change. I think I'm happy to sort of elaborate on any of it, but I would be curious to also pass on the baton and get everyone else's thoughts on it.
Yeah, great. Beatrice, Andrea, I think you need to unmute if you'd like to say something.
I can go. Yeah. No, I would like. I think Revi gave such a brilliant answer, and she mapped out many of the issues ahead. I mean, as a philosopher, one of the things I can say is this: to even deciding how to map out the food system, how to design, so to speak, the food system. It's a very important question. We can draw from other disciplines, so take a very basic example like architecture. You can ask yourself, what are the architectural items in your town? And this question might seem that you have to map out just the buildings, but architecture, as people dealing with that have discovered, is much more than that. There are the ways in which we think of spaces, the ways in which we think of how these spaces should be narrated, memorized, represented. It's much broader than just the plan of a building, And so the same could be for food. If we have to think about what is a food system even, you want to think precisely, did we ever map out the spaces for eating out, as one of the examples that Beatrice was talking about, and what is such a space? And is that part of the food system? And how do we represent it? And who do we go to talk about that? And so these are, I think, some of the questions that we clearly have to ask more more broadly. You know, we have to be a bit more imaginative, I think, about that. And if I would have to try to answer that question, one of the things, one of the first category of people I'll go to clearly are the people who make food, in the sense that they're really in between. They're in between the production chain, and then they're in between consumption. And this includes not just people who have a restaurant or who, you know, prepare street food or things like that, but even household, you know, people who prepare food in house. I think we should really get data interviews about what do they think about food systems. In part, we have them, but depending what kind of food system we're mapping, I think that's one of the works I would really like some of the data I would really like to take into serious considerations among others.
Beatrice, in your studies, have you had some ideas, some thoughts about what, you know, if you could wave your magic wand and have everybody listen to you, all the government regulators and whoever else, and so that you could say, this is what we need to do next. You need to listen to me because I'm Dr. Sarini. What would
this would be a great thought experiment to start a food philosophy book. You have this magic. Okay, you are a magician. You can ask. I never did that actually. I was more humble in my stream of thoughts, and I was thinking about what Rev said about blockchain. I really like all these new technologies. I spent sometimes in the past thinking about, you know, blockchain and food chain. And what you said, Rev, about the different cultures, different languages, the finger mille example, it's and what also Andrea said now about the one stakeholder in particular that has this crucial role, that the one at the beginning usually are also the one that are the last to be to have access to some new tools, some new technologies, but are the ones producing actually most of our food. And I was thinking it's more a sort of maybe a pessimistic thoughts, but our food chains are really global. Our cultures are not actually. Some parts of our culture has been globalized, but our region, our culture, our food culture are most regional, I would say. And if we are trying to represent something regional and put into a food chain and technological way of representing it, digitalizing it, and it will be transnational, transregional, international, we are going to lose something for sure. And we have to be clear who are the one in charge to make the decision. What can be lost in the digitalization process? I think that maybe we should be more realistic about this. We are going to lose something because it's a process of abstraction in part. And so the particular is going to be lost. But as Rev said, different languages, you don't have, for instance, this is a very, very silly example, but in the English language, you don't have the word for merenda. That is a specific meal in a specific part of the day that we in Italy we have, and we really value it, and there are specific food items associated with it. So this is a food practice, but I think there are many, many words that are not so easily translatable, let's say. So who is going to decide what can be dropped and what is valuable to be represented in the international food chain, to be transparent, immutable, and so on, because these are the values that are leading now and are for sure super important, but they are not just them. I hope it was clear.
I think you just raised a really good point, Beatrice. A couple good points. One that the food systems are transnational, but culture is not necessarily. And in fact, your language point about the meal there is well taken. So, does someone have to be in charge? Do we need a top-down food system, or is it possible to have a bottom-up food system? And I think cryptocurrencies and blockchains offer some pathways potentially toward democratization, I think. But there was a point when we thought that the internet was going to offer democratization of knowledge. And what we've actually seen is that we have massively divergent wealth streams now because of the internet and power. And so it's actually de-democratized the world in some ways. And so I wonder, I guess maybe we have to be careful with what we're doing here. Because, the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So, how do we keep from having good intentions, but going down the wrong path?
Can I jump in on that?
Oh, please.
Wonderful. I'm gonna ride on both the question you raised, Matthew, and what Beatrice was saying. I think that really sums up the quandary in a nutshell. Global food chains, global technology systems, local cultures, and if you look at it, from detaching from the perspective of food systems, global action that's needed for climate, for instance, global impact that's needed, but actions that are probably local, and communities that are local. So I think it's the same sort of a problem or a context that we see in a lot of these scenarios. And I think the question you raised is a really, really good one, and it's something that's deeply affected by everyone's personal philosophy. So what I'm going to say is something that's sort of a very, very personal, subjective view. I come from the perspective of a commons governance researcher, and I view a lot of these as a question of the commons. The world and the planet is a commons. It's a shared resource. And when you have food chains that are global, or food systems, they're also a commons because it is a shared resource for all of the community, whether that's a producer, a consumers, an intermediary, anybody else in between. They all interact with it in different ways, but it is a shared resource, and it is in everybody's interest that it sustains. And in the field of commons, one of the foundational things that a lot of researchers know about is principles by Elinor Ostrom, who looked at a lot of resources that exist in nature and looked at and abstracted out 8 principles that are common for when a community could govern those in a way that the resource can be sustained, right? And so a few things that really stand out there is one, you need to have a bigger purpose. Everybody needs to be driven by sort of like some sort of a shared vision kind of thing. And the second thing is that you need a steward, or at least you need stewarding principles. And part of that is a boundary. You need to have exit conditions. Like you need to know when somebody is part of the commons and when somebody is not, or needs to be removed from the community, so to speak. And I'm really, really, really simplifying the principles here a lot as it applies to this. But I do think that's really important to remember, that behind every piece of code is a human who wrote it. Behind every technological system are a community of humans whose implicit biases and whose cultural conditioning really impacts how they use the system. And so whenever you have such a system that's across cultures, across communities, everybody comes in with their own agendas, their own biases, their own conditioning. And you need to have some set of standards and somebody who can steward them. And that could be a more distributed form of stewarding. It could be data standards that allow for interoperability, other kinds of standards, whatever else. But you need some sort of stewarding principles. And you also need to know when something is in, something is out. Like what Beatrice was saying, like how do you know something is local food or not? How do you know something makes its way into the global chain versus stays in the local language? And I mean, this is a very abstract theoretical answer. And there are comments that exist that implement these principles successfully. And Elinor Ostrom studied a bunch of them, like lobster fisheries in Maine and so on and so forth. But back during those days, digital systems did not exist. And a lot of the natural resource based comments that she studied, what's common amongst them is as you utilize more of them, they can replenish in value. That's the traditional tragedy of the commons in economics, right? But that's not true with data systems. With data systems, data is a team sport. So as people share it and as more people come in, the value of the system may actually increase. And that's something we have to remember also as we think through these systems as commons.
I think that's a really good point. We have a comment, just so you know. Bruce Raza writes in, multiple key messages on this call today that are very important and that general purpose agri-food events just don't address. So thanks, Bruce, for the comment. That is really, really wonderful and exactly what we're trying to do here with No Food Live. We are just about over time. There's another comment here. I'm going to let from Christopher Nerf. It's split into two comments. So asking about the attempt to create language between different cultures and how that differs from early 20th century positivist attempts to create universally based mathematical languages. I'm afraid we probably don't have time to get into that right now. But I would encourage you to get in touch with Andrea and Beatrice. We are actually just about 10 minutes over the hour, but there's one more thing that I want to get to. And it was just approved. And in fact, somehow Andrea got it up on his website really quickly. And I'm going to put this up there because I'm very excited to say this, that we have a new PhD program. That's a joint effort between the University of Milan and IC Foods. Woohoo! And precisely for building ontologies to represent farm to fork food systems. Andrea, you want to jump in here and help me out?
Yeah. Just to say that this is a great opportunity for anyone who has you have to have a master degree at hand, and it will be part of the PhD in mind, brain, and reasoning at the University of Milan. But the contract is for 3 years to do a PhD. So at the end, one has a full PhD, and it's project based. So this is the project. The deadline is very soon. In a sense, it's November 8th. if anyone has any questions, please, get in touch with me or with Matthew. It would be great to have, good candidates. They don't have to be philosophers. You don't have to be a philosopher, but of course, have an interest in dealing with the type of questions that we were discussing today, actually.
Right. Yeah, I think, and I'm guessing there will be a chance to learn some more computational systems, data systems, some of the governance type issues that Revathi was talking about. I'm pretty excited. This is a really cool opportunity with mixed methods, and an opportunity to work not only with the group here, but with all the guests that have been on No Food Live and who will continue to be on No Food Live. So it'll be a very transdisciplinary project.
Yeah, that's super exciting, and also just what a great conversation we all had today.
Yeah.
So thank you all. I mean, and to our virtual audience, please join us in thanking Andrea, Beatrice, and Revathi for sharing their work with us today. And I think we all look forward to future conversations on these really tricky and important issues that we've been talking about.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yes, thank you. Thank you. It was
Thanks
great.
for having us.
Super great.
So if you guys stick around before, after we close out, that'd be great. We can have a little chatty chat. And I just wanted to remind the audience that we'll be back on the third Thursday of November, which is in the United States, the week before Thanksgiving. I have a feeling we might actually be on the Canadian Thanksgiving, which is not such good timing, but we can only do so much in scheduling.
Who doesn't want to talk about food on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, right. So
and also just don't forget, everything that we do is posted on YouTube. So if you miss it, you can watch it later. And if you hit subscribe, you'll know when the next one's coming up. So please do. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.